Nice. Thank you. Mr. Godongwana, welcome to you. We are almost ready to go, sir. Let's test your sound.
You must unmute.
Oh, yeah, the press unmute.
Okay, great. Minister of Finance. Right. Now, the only missing party, we've got our two ministers here. The only missing party seems to be Mr. Dix. Is there anybody who can give me an update on whether Rudy has connected yet?
Okay. He is connecting.
Okay, wonderful.
Is he connected?
Not yet, but he is connecting now.
So he mustn't cut it too close to the wind, ne? Time is not on our side for Rudy. Irene, are you ready to start going live in 2 minutes? Irene? Minister Godongwana, you've got the program in front of you, sir. You're still on mute, Minister.
I don't have it, but I suspect it's in my hand.
Thanks.
Minister Gungubele will introduce the subject matter and I'll make some few comments thereafter.
That's it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Correct. It's in your head.
Rudy, are you here yet?
Rudy is saying that he is settling down, but we can start. He's gonna join now. He is joining now.
No, he's just in.
We have media that have already logged in, so I would suggest that we start.
Irene, I'm about to give the countdown. Rudy, are you there? Can you hear us?
I am here. I'm just about to transfer it to my computer, but I am here, okay?
Okay, Mr. Dix, we hear you loud and clear. Nomvuyo, can I just have one more voice test from you, please?
Hi, Michael. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, you're still too soft, my sister. You need to come a little bit closer to the mic. You know? Right, ladies and gentlemen, Irene, can we please go live? It is now 2 o'clock Opticop. Thank you very much. And Nonlaba, we will be in your and Irene's hands to field the questions. Let's go live to our media colleagues. Thank you very much.
Are we ready?
Yep.
Should I proceed?
Irene, you'll give us the green light when we're ready, please.
You may start, Minister. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Irene, Mike, and the entire support team. Good afternoon, Minister Godongwana, Minister of Finance, your team. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, thank you for your prompt response to this invitation for conversation on a very special matter regarding freeing our economy. I would like to welcome all of you this afternoon to this briefing, which will focus on two things. First, to reflect on what has been achieved since we established Operation Vulindlela just more than a year ago. And second, to outline our plans for the months ahead. The President announced the establishment of Operation Vulindlela in October 2020 in his address to joint sitting of Parliament on the Economic Reconstruction and Development and Recovery Plan. Operation Vulindlela is a joint initiative of the Presidency and National Treasury. I want to emphasize the unique nature of this partnership, which brings together the ability of the Presidency to coordinate across government at a political and administrative level, and the technical expertise of National Treasury under the leadership of the Minister of Finance. The core purpose of Operation Vulindlela is to accelerate the implementation of structural reform and enable higher growth. The President has given us a mandate to drive much faster delivery on the reforms that we have committed to as government and to do whatever it takes to revive our economy and create jobs. We are focusing on reforms in 5 key areas, ladies and gentlemen. First, The first in the electricity sector to achieve an adequate and reliable energy supply. Second, in the telecommunications sector to achieve reduced cost and increased quality of digital communication. Third, in the water sector to achieve a sustainable water supply that meets the demand. Fourth, in the transport sector to create competitive and efficient freight transport and system. And fifth, in the visa regime to establish a visa system that attracts investment and skills. One important outcome of the Operation Vulindlela has been to end long-standing delays in implementation in several areas. This includes the implementation of the spectrum auction after a delay of more than 10 years, the establishment of National Ports Authority as a separate subsidiary of Transnet, which was delayed since 2005, the updating of the critical skills list for the first time since 2014, and the reinstatement of the water quality monitoring system, also for the first time since 2024. These are examples of the commitment which this administration has made to overcome inertia and drive progress on the economic reform agenda. Another important role of Operation Vulindlela has been to provide a clear policy direction and ensure policy certainty in several areas. This includes, for example, the finalization of national rail policy, which outlines the future of the rail sector. Departments and entities themselves remain responsible for the implementation of the reforms. Operation Vulindlela does not replace their role, but rather provides active support for implementation, especially where capacity is lacking. One of the most important roles of Operation Vulindlela is to ensure effective coordination of the reform agenda across government, especially where there are multiple departments involved in the single reform. The Presidency and National Treasury, under the leadership of Minister of Finance, Mr. Godongwana, are uniquely placed at the center of government to provide third bird's eye view of reforms and to report on progress to the President. In conclusion, we've made a significant progress since Operation Vulindlela was established to accelerate the implementation of reforms that are needed to lift economic growth. However, we know too that there's still much work to be done. Our job is not to sugarcoat the challenges that we continue to face, but to present a real assessment of our progress and an account of the steps we are taking to restore confidence in our economy. The progress report, which we are releasing this week for the first time, first quarter of 2020, aims to ensure greater transparency in the work that we are doing and to create an open channel of communication. We will be releasing a similar report every quarter to provide South Africans with a clear view of the work that is being done to turn around our economy, restore growth, and create jobs. At this point in time, the man himself, who is a specialist in the area, Minister of Finance and his team, will actually take us through and make his overview remarks. Minister Godongwana. Minister. Is the minister still connected? Minister?
Thank you, Minister. Yes, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
We can hear you now. You were freezed. Thank you.
Oh, okay. I was saying good afternoon. As we have said, Minister Gungubele has indicated, Operation Vulindlela was born out of the need to urgently implement the structural reforms that are critical for raising economic growth, creating jobs, and beginning to make meaningful inroads on our unacceptable high levels of poverty and inequality. Structural reforms refer to interventions and measures such as changes to policy processes, legislation, regulation, and institution that address obstacles to the fundamental drivers of growth as a strategy to raise the potential for growth of a country. They are essential to promoting economic transformation, supporting labor-intensive and inclusive growth, improving efficiency of resource allocation, as well as creating a global competitive economy. Their successful implementation creates a conducive business environment for investment, both domestic and foreign. A well-implemented reform program can also raise confidence levels, supporting a market easing of sovereign risk and borrowing costs. This can free up much-needed fiscal space and lower economic-wide borrowing costs. In this way, it enables greater job creation, support fiscal sustainability, and spurs economic growth even in the short term. Modeling work by National Treasury has indicated the value of these reforms. We can raise economic growth significantly beyond this anemic levels of sub 2% and create over 1 million jobs relative to a scenario without reforms. A total of 26 reforms of structural reforms were prioritized to modernize and transform network industries, including electricity, water, transport, and digital communications, and to attract skills and promote growth in tourism through reforms in the visa regime. Of this total, 8 reforms have been completed, while another 11 are progressing, where a minority of reforms are facing delays in implementation. These reforms are already bearing fruit. In digital communication, the successful allocation of high demand spectrum not only raised more than 8 billion rand for the fiscus, recent estimates suggest that the industry will invest over 50 billion on the back of this. In transport, the successful implementation of third-party access to the freight rail network can spare an additional investment of 58 billion rand. In electricity, where we're working with the private sector to unblock the remaining challenges to free up embedded generation, we can realize investment of 54 billion rand. While we welcome the progress of Vulindlela, this has seemingly been misinterpreted as premature or ignoring the very real frustrations on the ground at the slow pace of this reform that are not progressing well, or in the case of restoring Eskom's energy availability factor to 70%, seem completely unattainable. We are mindful of these reforms, and over the coming months, we'll redouble our efforts to resolve the energy crisis and ensure that the reforms facing implementation challenges access the support they need to progress. Because we are committed to unlocking the dynamism of this economy and placing our growth on a permanently higher trajectory. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Godongwana. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, now we'll hand over to Rudy to actually give us a detailed presentation of the progress report. Mr. Dix.
Thank you, Minister. We'll just, so you want to load the slides. Nomvuyo will start, Minister Gungubele, and then I will do the last few slides, so we're just breaking up the presentation. Nomvuyo, so can you load the deck?
Thanks, Rudy. If the GCIS team could just enable screen sharing.
Colleagues from GCIS? Karine, Mike?
Thank you, Rudy. Good afternoon. I just want to check, Irene, is someone helping Saul load the presentation, please?
I have made Saul a co-host, so you should be able to share your screen. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Apology for the delay, ministers, members of the media. Ms. Kuma?
Are you ready, Rudy?
Yes, we're ready now, Minister.
We're ready, Minister.
Thank you. Go on, Nomvuyo.
Thank you, Minister. Good afternoon, Minister, colleagues, and members of the media. The next couple of slides will just give you an overview of Vulindlela's progress to date, some of the highlights along the way, and then sharing some of the lessons that we've learned and giving a taste of some of the new reforms that are being added to the portfolio. Next slide, please. So just to highlight what the ministers have already indicated and what we've publicly communicated about Operation Vulindlela to date, the purpose is to accelerate structural reforms in 5 key areas. Firstly, we aim to stabilize the supply of electricity, noting how critical this is for our economic growth and development. Secondly, reducing the cost and increasing the quality of digital communications. Thirdly, ensuring sustainable water supply that meets demand both now and over the long term. Fourthly, ensuring a competitive and efficient freight transport regime. And fifthly, ensuring a visa regime that attracts skills and grows the tourism sector. Next slide, please. So just to recap, some of the progress that the team has made to date. And these are key achievements just for Q1 of this year. There are others that we've previously highlighted to the media that wouldn't feature in this new updated deck. So for instance, you'll note that the lifting of the embedded generation licensing threshold to 100 megawatts that was achieved last year obviously wouldn't feature in this new updated list. But so far in Q1, we've had the conclusion of the spectrum auction. There was some concern that pending litigation from one of the players in the market would stymie the result or negatively impact that result. However, we've seen the settlement between industry players and the regulator reaching finality and bringing finality to the auction outcome. On the back of this, as the minister indicated, we're expecting a further flurry of investment to support this allocation in that sector. In the energy sector, we've had bid window 6 of the Renewable Energy Program open, and preferred bidders have been announced from bid window 5, and they're expected to reach financial close soon. We've had the publication of the draft Electricity Regulation Amendment Bill. This has been open for public comment, and the aim here is to ensure a more competitive electricity market. This reform is occurring alongside the unbundling of Eskom, which is proceeding according to schedule, and the establishment of an independent transmission company that was achieved last year. We've also had the white paper on national rail policy approved by Cabinet. This provides clear policy direction on critical policy questions such as third-party access and the devolution of passenger rail. We've also revived various water quality monitoring systems. So we've had the Green Drop report published recently for the first time since 2014. This allows for better monitoring of water and wastewater treatment quality. It allows for greater accountability and allows for government to assess where municipalities may need support in implementing and improving water quality. The revised critical skills list has been published for the first time since 2014. This allows us to reflect the current skills shortages in the economy and where necessary allows businesses to attract these skills from outside the country in the short term as a first step towards reviewing the broader skills immigration framework for South Africa. And then finally, the RFP for access to initiate third-party access in the freight-to-rail network has been initiated by Transnet. And this will be followed by RFPs in ports as well. Next slide, please. So just to give you a sense of where we are with the reforms to date, we've ticked off 8 reforms as completed. And just to note here that when we say completed, we don't mean that this is the end of the reform or that therefore all is well. So for example, if we indicate raising the licensing threshold for embedded generation, that has been achieved. However, we are mindful that there's still going to be further steps necessary to make sure that this reform achieves its full impact. And Rudy is going to take you through some of the work that we're doing on that. However, we do need to tick this off as a reform that has been complete because at least the first step has been completed. The next set of reforms are those that are on track or underway. These are progressing well. And at this point, the team doesn't believe that there is a need to intervene on this. The ones that are in yellow are reforms that are experiencing some challenges or delays in implementation. However, these are not ones in which, for the most part, in which deadlines have been missed. And additional support is being given to reform implementators in this regard to accelerate implementation here. And there are two where there are some critical challenges in implementation. Unfortunately, these are two in the energy sphere, and we know that this is having a particularly negative impact on our economy. These are two where we are redoubling efforts to make sure that we can see the full impact of these reforms being realized. And Rudy will take you through some of the detail in later slides. Next slide, please. So finally, just looking ahead, as we tick some reforms off or they re-emerge in the dashboard in some slightly changed detail, we're also looking out for what are the highlights that we're looking to tick off this year. So completing the analog switch off, this has been delayed to the 30th of June per court order, but completing this will enable spectrum in additional frequencies, the 700 and 800, to be used for mobile telecommunications, and we're anticipating a further substantial boost for investment in the sector to stem from this. We anticipate that the finalization of the amendments to the Electricity Regulation Act and electricity pricing policy will enable the emergence of a modern and more competitive electricity market that has more consistent supply and hopefully lower prices as well. Enabling third-party access to the freight rail network will transform freight rail. This allows private operators to utilize the network, and with the passage of the Economic Regulation of Transport Bill, which we're also anticipating will be done this year, will enable a transparent, non-discriminatory regulated access to these networks in future. We're hoping as well that this reform will help to increase efficiency, remove some of the log jams that we know have been experienced in this regard, and will boost growth and investment into the future. Issuing private sector investment in container port terminals is another reform that we expect to be finalized this year. This will allow for the upgrading and expansion of infrastructure in this sphere and will hopefully result in marked improvements in port efficiency that can help to boost our export goals as well. Implementing the recommendations of the work visa review, which is forthcoming, will enable firms to attract skilled personnel, and this will further promote investment and growth. And finally, establishing the National Water Resources Agency, this is known as a SANRAL for water, will improve the management of bulk water infrastructure resources and will enable private sector investment in water infrastructure as well. This will hopefully improve the security of supply and will also improve the licensing of water, pricing of water, excuse me. So Rudy, I'm going to hand over to you at this stage to talk about some of the lessons that we've learned on OV and the focus on the energy sector. Thank you.
Thanks, Nomvuyo. Afternoon, Minister Godongwana. Afternoon, Minister Gungubele. Afternoon, colleagues from the media. So as building on Nomvuyo, I think it's important that one has to understand, as Minister Gungubele had explained, that the OV process is designed for an outcome. You know, that's important. We design for an outcome and for an impact. And it's quite critical that when we do a reform, there's an end goal that we want, and that of course is quite critical. It's economic growth, investment, and of course employment. And therefore for us, it's important to follow through, coordinate, and prioritize. So it's essential to ensure follow through on reform implementation. And so while, as Vuyo says, we tick the box, there may be other significant implications that we didn't quite factor in if we refer, for example, to the 100 megawatt, the sub 100 megawatt as an example. So once a reform is implemented, further actions are potentially needed to achieve its full impact. And one of those examples we thought was quite important is the licensing threshold, right? And in the licensing threshold, for example, it was quite pertinent for us to be able to understand, you know, when the President and Minister Mantashe had announced the change in the licensing threshold to 100 megawatts, and the indications were from the Chamber of the Minerals Council and the Energy Intensive User Group that they had about 4,000 megawatts. This was quite important for us to be able to ensure why these investments weren't happening. And of course, what we did do is design an intervention that would allow us to be able to deal with some of the issues on EIAs, water use licenses, the actual regulation at NERSA, grid connection, and some of these issues. We'll speak a little bit about that. Again, providing support to municipalities and intervening when necessary, in particular when we deal with water services, as highlighted by the Green Drop report. And then, of course, ensuring that lower frequency spectrum is made available for mobile telecommunications through the completion of the digital migration. So, you know, getting the reform across and ticked also means that it requires a lot of follow-up, right? Secondly, I think what is quite critical is coordination across government is key. So many of these reforms are not only in a single department or a single entity. Energy, for example, is a case in point, or even transport is a case in point, and does require for us to involve multiple departments, for example, to deal with that. And we use work visa processes, new generation projects, rail policy and regulation. Strong coordination, and it's why OV is set up in the center of government as a partnership between a National Treasury and the Presidency to be able to strongly coordinate and get many of the reforms across the line. Another lesson that we've learned is that fewer priorities lead to greater impact. And when we started seeing some of the successes coming through, there's been a high demand to place every single item as a reform item. Now, it's important for us, colleagues, that getting government to work and dealing with efficiency, capacity constraints is quite critical. But the lesson that we did learn is that if you, for example, place a number of priorities, tens of different priorities, it dissipates, the effectiveness is marginal, the ability to be able to coordinate, the ability to get the actual reform across the lines, it becomes quite critical, quite problematic. And so in this instance, as we had said, we focused on those 5 priorities because we know that these 5 priorities, from the evidence and the modeling that we've done, has the greatest impact on the economy, employment, and investment. So if we do these reforms, this will have a significant multiplier effect on growth. And that's why we've identified these specific. There is, of course, a list of other reforms that we'll refer to, but these are the key things that
Unmute, Rudy.
Oh, someone had muted me. Sorry about that, Minister. So I wanted to, there's been a lot of talk about the impact of what we're doing, and I think energy is a good example, and the 100 megawatts. So when we announced the 100 megawatts last year, we had an indication that close to between 6,000 and 7,000 private sector investors would invest. 6 months later, we realized that this didn't happen, and we started asking the question. So in a sense, what we needed to do was develop a process to unlock significant latent demand for better generation projects, right? What we did, colleagues, was to set up a process. Now, this is very interesting because we've taken our partnership beyond just a process where we brought in the key departments. We've now actually brought in industry into that. So every Thursday morning between 8 and 9, we have an action work plan that we track. We deal with specific examples. But this involves, for example, the Department of DMRE, NERSA as the regulation, the Department of Environmental Forestry and Fisheries, National Treasury, ourselves, the Department of Water and Sanitation, the Department of Agriculture, Rural Development and Land Reform to deal with land use issues, SALGA, for example. On the other side, we also have the Minerals Council of South Africa and the chairperson of the Energy Intensive User Group. So this is quite important for us in developing a partnership approach on specifically addressing some of the constraints. And many of the people that come there have constraints around, it's taken long for us to do a water use license. We don't quite understand why a cost estimate letter from ESCOM is taking this long, including a budget quote for us to be able to get grid connections. So we've been able to do this for the last 2 months to get through many of the projects that are there. The task team works through, as we expressed, the shortening of the time frames of environmental impact assessments. through designations, and part of the example here is designating these projects as SIPS projects. What that means, automatically, if the designation is approved, it reduces the EI timeframe from 107 days to 57 days. We're working with Eskom, and Eskom has given us that indication that they are going to improve capacity in the grid connection unit to ensure that applications in terms of cost estimate letters and budget quotes are done speedily as possible. Remember, Eskom hasn't necessarily been designed for this kind of, tens of different applications of these kind of small sizes that are there. We're putting in place a wheeling framework and dealing with this, particularly at a municipal and at an Eskom level, so that there's quite clarity on the wheeling framework, including pricing. And we're simplifying the NERSA process for registration. For instance, the NERSA process had requested that part of the NERSA registration required a power purchase agreement between the operator and the one that's receiving the energy. And this has been resolved because a lot of the PPAs, of course, it's not in the public. It's not a public issue. A matter that is regulated by the PFMA. It's a private contractual agreement between two parties, and we don't think that is necessary. So we've been able to work and cooperate. Now, the potential of this, as you can see, colleagues, is quite significant. In the design of this intervention, where we meet weekly, we have now been able to track 58 projects. So it's gone from about 30 odd to 58 projects with a total capacity of 4.5 gigawatts of energy. If we're able to work through the specific constraints that we've identified here, we think there's a potential to be able to get many of this onto the grid by 2022, between 2022 and 2024. The key thing here is getting it to be shovel ready. And once you deal with the regulatory constraints, it is easy for the private sector to invest, and of course, we're able to get the grid connections that are quite critical. So a good example of how we've taken the reform process from merely saying that the reform is done to trying to deal with, in a granular format, some of the specific constraints of a reform that can unlock latent demand as energy, and this is quite important. So I think that's the last slide, if I'm not mistaken, ministers and colleagues, but we hope that this gives us the media colleagues a deeper sense of the work that we've been doing as OE. Back to you, Minister. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Dix. Thank you, Ms. Guma. Thank you, Minister. Ladies and gentlemen, now it's a time for question. I want to check if we've got any questions.
No, thank you. Thank you very much, Minister. We do have a question. We have one question here on the Q&As, and the question is posted by Tekmen Tezi, who is a Turkish journalist who is representing Turkish Minute. And the question is, how will South African government cut the red tape at the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, the Department of Water and Sanitation, and the Department of Environmental Affairs? And he further said currently almost no new mines are developed because of the red tape. That was the first question, Minister. And we also have a question from Terence Creamer. And then the question is, he said, I understand the distinction being made internally between approving a reform and following up on its implementation. But will you agree that such a distinction is meaningless for the public and even stakeholders? And he said, therefore, does it not undermine the credibility of the progress update when it claims the 100 megawatts reform to be completed when there is no sign of project registration and little indication by when the remaining red tape will be cleared? And with your permission, Minister, there's also a question from Paul from Bloomberg. And the question is, when do you expect the first of the 10 megawatts projects to come online? So far, those are the questions that we have. And back to you, Minister. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We'll start. Should we start with the minister or with yourself, Vuyo, or Rudi will start to respond?
No, we'll ask the ministers to respond, and we can assist if that's the case.
Thank you. Minister Godongwana. Have we lost Minister Godongwana? Seems as if we have lost Minister Godongwana. Do you guys want to make an attempt?
Can I start?
On the water and mineral?
Yeah. We agree. I mean, I think that
area.
Yeah, I think we agree that there are constraints, and part of the embedded generation group is starting to look at some of the constraints regarding time for environmental impact assessments, the registration process at the NERSA, and of course the water use license application process. I think there's an acknowledgement in government that what we are trying to do is to deal with that kind of red tape and how one expedite this. And for example, a good example is the reduction in the time frame for embedded generation projects as a good example of reducing it from 107 to 57 days. The Department of Water and Sanitation has committed by its new DG, for example, Dr. Sean Phillips. We've supported the re-engineering of the WULA system as part of OV to try and expedite and improve the efficiency in the system for use licenses, and this is going to be quite critical. We are having conversations and will continue to keep colleagues updated in our engagements with the Minister of DMRE in relation to some of the concerns regarding the mining license applications. And this is going to be quite an important area for us to be able to do. Terrence, there is a distinction because it's quite critical for us when, you have to see it in a manner that says, when there was a request to unlock the embedded generation, what we did was to get a regulation out. And part of that process was to develop a level of confidence and surety that the reform process of opening up the electricity sector, getting private sector to invest, and most importantly, to try and ensure that we get more megawatts in the grid, or at least in this instance through the embedded generation, getting more megawatts off the grid so the private sector is able to generate their own energy. And that's an important step, because I think it's quite critical that we do see that step as an important step, that we were able to create that kind of confidence. And if you recall, when the minister and the president was able to announce it, there was quite a lot of support for that kind of reform. Many colleagues here had said that it's not going to happen. Many colleagues had suggested that we're not ready for this kind of reform, but we were able to do that. What we're trying to do is to say that there are critical interventions where if the impact is not felt immediately, what are the conversations that we have to have with industry to make that happen? So we understand the process flow, but we understand that there's a difference between the two. So part of the intervention is to design for dealing with some of that. And in a sense, so when we look at the reform, there's a particular objective that we try and set. There's a methodology that we design to unblock. But underneath that, there may be a number of other areas that constrain us in getting to a logical point of greater levels of investment, economic growth, and employment. So I think it's quite critical for us to be able to understand the difference between that. And that's why when we do the reporting, we will make that distinction. But we'll also admit that sometimes this does require further intervention to ensure we unlock, for example, latent demand in the embedded generation space through some of the interventions that are there. As for the last point related to the 100 megawatt, I think it's not 10, it's 100 megawatt. I don't think we are able to give that kind of commitment. This is in the hands of the private sector. What we are working, as we've said, is working through dealing with some of the, the granular regulatory constraints like EIAs and the registration process at NERSA, the grid connections at ESCOM, some water and sanitation's water use license, some applications relate to a land use, for example, and we need to resolve that. These are dependent on us moving quite fast. We have committed with industry to working on resolving those particular challenges. Once those challenges are out of the way, it is up to the private sector to take a decision on when is those projects shovel ready. And I think this is going to be quite critical. I don't think we are able to commit that a project from Sibania or a project from Anglo or from any one of the 58 project developers is going to happen at this point in time, and it's going to happen and it's going to end. This is not in the public domain. This is a private sector investment initiative. And therefore, I think we can merely estimate, because I think if we work quite hard and we do the reform as we've done before on other reforms, we estimate that many of these projects could come online between 2022 and 2024. And I think that's broadly what we want to suggest and indicate. I think it's very difficult for us to pinpoint that this project will come online at this point in time. There are many factors, of course, when you build this kind of stuff. But at least from what is in our control from a regulatory point of view, OVE is working with the relevant departments to try and deal with those regulatory constraints and to ease the regulatory burden, including reducing the days, efficiencies, so that these projects are able to become shovel-ready quite soon.
Thank you, Rudy. Vuyo, do you want to come in?
No, thank you, Minister. I think Rudy has pretty much responded on behalf of the team. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for clarifying, Rudy, for telling the issue of difference on internal and external, and also explaining that ours on the 100 megawatts is to clean the environment and make it easy for them to take advantage of that opportunity. Do we have any ladies and gentlemen within the virtual who want to raise questions? Let me check. I have none on my chat. If anyone is there, can anyone say anything? Do we have any?
Minister,
yes?
Yes, we do have another question from Terence Krima again. And he's saying, there seems to have been a fairly tepid market response, to the third-party rail access reform. And the question thereof is, are you also concerned the architecture of the slot sales may not be fit for purpose? That was the question, and back to you. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you very much. And I think that's an important question, but Rudy and Vuyo may take it further. I know that in responding to those requests, there has been an issue of contract duration and a number of other things. And I anticipate for commercial purposes, Transnet must be attending to that, but let the specialists who are here deal with that. Who starts, is it Vuyo or Rudy? Vuyo, do you want to come in?
I'll start, Minister, and Rudy can come in if there's additional information. So I think we've also noted the initial market response to the RFP. But I think when it comes to this reform, it's important to keep the bigger picture in mind. There is a process to establish an economic regulator. And in an ideal world, we would have this regulator in place, and this regulator would then serve as a neutral and independent arbiter in this space. And that's what we're working towards in the long term. But we can't wait to implement this very important reform. So Transnet has gone ahead and they've made a limited number of slots available in the short term, in the interim, so that we can get moving on this reform. And of course, when the regulator then comes in, they will be able to ensure that there is better, fairer access for all onto this freight rail network. So this is about a timing issue. Having said that, we have noted some of the concerns that industry has raised. We are engaging with Transnet, and we're hoping to reach a fair and mediated outcome in this regard. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Vuyo. Rudy, do you want to say anything?
covered by Vuyo, Minister.
Thank you very much for covering each other. One of the things that Transnet would have said, there's an element of pilotary nature, but they are better placed to explain that. But I think Vuyo has actually articulated that it would have been ideal if the regulator was there, but saying that the parties between themselves in the interim, they are the only people who can interact on this in the absence of the regulator, because it's an opportunity that cannot be allowed to wait. It has to be exploited now. Any further question?
No, thanks, Minister.
No.
There's no any other further questions, Minister. Back to you, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think Vuyo and Rudy were too clear in their articulation. Maybe a lot of answers found expression in their presentation. Can I take this opportunity to thank the entire media of South Africa, our support team, especially Vuyo and Rudy, the minister, and the GCIS team, all of you guys, for always ensuring that we're able to do this very fundamental job of communicating to South Africa the state of our economy, where are we taking, how are we intervening in dealing with the strictures in the economy. Thank you very much. We adjourn. Thank you.
Thank you, ministers.
Bye-bye.